Marsha, you did great. Thank you. All right, well, as Marsha said, my name is Palmer Chinchen, and I'm a writer and a speaker, and I lead a church in Arizona called The Grove. And it's good to be back at Biola because, first of all, my son is a senior here, Spencer, and my niece Annabelle is a senior, Annabelle Chinchen. And then also, I'm a graduate of Biola. I'm an alum. I also got a master's in intercultural studies. But better than all of that, I met my wife here. I was in Horton, and she was in Alpha. And the first time I saw her, I told my best friend back in Horton, I said, I'm going to marry her. And I did. It sounds, he said, you're crazy. And I finally got up the courage to ask her out our first week here at Biola. And I stopped her after chapel as she's checking her mail right there, like all of you do. And I said, hey, Veronica, how about, would you want to go to Knott's Berry Farm this Friday night? And she goes, long pause, long, awkward pause. She says, I've got to babysit. And I was like, oh. And so now a lesser man would have walked away discouraged, knowing he was dissed. But I came right back with, forget about dirty Knott's. How about Disneyland? She said, I'll get out of the babysitting. And we kissed on the Matterhorn. Boom goes the dynamite, and married by our junior year. So that's why I say it's good to be back here at Biola. As Marsha said, this morning I want to talk about spirituality and justice. I want to pick up on what Henry Joseph was talking about, and he's a longtime friend. It's so good to be here with him. And he was talking about the great I am. And this morning I want to talk about how the great I am wants justice. And so to kind of give some texture and some background to what I'm talking about this morning, I brought a video we just put together. Watch this with me. It's just a few minutes. You know, there's, like Marsha said, I spent about half my life in Africa growing up there and living there and teaching there. And I realized a long time ago that there's some moments that last a lifetime. And as I talk about spirituality and justice and worship and justice, there's a moment that has stuck with me for years, since I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school, and my twin brother and I, and my brother Paul is here this morning, and he's leading a seminar here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. But we're in a minivan going to a Wednesday night Bible study filled with missionary kids, about half a dozen other missionary high schoolers. And all of a sudden on this 4-lane road, a yellow taxi passes us on the right, doesn't see this mound of dirt, and it hits this massive mound of dirt that launches it into a steel telephone pole, slams into the pole, and then it rolls at least 2 times, maybe 3 times. So right away I jump towards a door, other students grab doors, but the van didn't stop. And we thought for sure our van driver, I'll say his name is Mike, saw it. We said, Mike, stop. And he just kept going. And now we're all yelling, Mike, did you see the accident? And these yellow taxis, they'll have 6, 7, 8 people, and you knew somebody was really messed up. And Mike, stop the van. And now he's driving like he can't even hear us. He won't even acknowledge that we're yelling. Mike, stop. And everybody's yelling. And so finally we give up. And I knew that Mike had been a paramedic before he came to Liberia, and I knew he could help. I knew we could do something, but he just kept driving. And then we pulled into the Baptist place for Bible study. And then as he's putting the van in park, he turns to us and he calmly says, just so you know, I saw the accident. But I knew if I stopped, I would have to give someone mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And he said, tonight, I didn't feel like giving anyone mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And as a 17-year-old, I was disgusted. And I remember sitting in the back of the van, and I prayed this short prayer in the dark. God, I promise you, I will live differently. I will do all I can to live differently. I hope you don't miss the irony in what happened that night. So here we are driving to a Bible study, and we're going to go in and we're going to sing songs about Jesus and read pages from the Bible about God, and we're going to pray to God. But we don't stop to help the man or the people on the side of the road who are desperately maybe even dying. There's something kind of wrong with that kind of worship. And so maybe you haven't thought much before about the connection between worship and justice, But the Bible, time and time again, makes this critical connection between our worship to God and the fact that we have a God, the great I Am, who wants justice. You have to open your Bibles with me, or just listen. I have the words on the screen. In Isaiah, we read about God's desire for justice. And I'm going to read from the Message Bible. It's a paraphrase, but I love the language that Eugene Peterson uses. This is verse 3. Tell my people what's wrong with their lives. They're busy at worship and love studying all about me. Do you think this is the kind of fast day I'm after, a day of show-off humility? This is the kind of fast, verse 6, this is the kind of fast I'm after, to break the chains of injustice, get rid of exploitation in the workplace, free the oppressed. What I'm interested in is seeing you do is share your food with the hungry, invite the homeless poor into your homes, and put clothes on the shivering, ill-clad, and I'll add to that and put shoes on their bare feet. You see what God is saying here? He says, God is saying, care more than just about your personal piety when you come to me to worship. True religion, as Isaiah writes about it, as God defines it, true religion includes a passion for justice and includes being bothered by oppression and showing compassion to those who hurt. I have 3 thoughts here. Let's put the next slide up. This is where I want to head this morning. I want to say first that the great I Am despises injustice and he wants it stopped. And then next, I want to say seeking justice for the oppressed is doable. And then most importantly, you are part of God's plan to bring justice into our world. So what is justice? When we use that language, what does that mean? I think, first of all, it means that we help a society regain its moral bearing and its moral equilibrium. I'll give you an example when I say, what is justice? Injustice looks like this. Injustice is when a man gets pulled over on a street just because of the color of his skin. So after I finished my master's here at Biola, I went to Wheaton where I served as a college pastor. And I had a young guy, he was a master's student, a grad student in my ministry. His name was Lincoln Douglas, and he played the drums for us. Now you've got to picture Lincoln. Lincoln was from Trinidad, Tobago. He had a mohawk. He was as thick as a linebacker, bold, huge muscles. And then anytime after February to October, he wore a tank top or a cutoff t-shirt, and his arms were just ripped. And he was intimidating just seeing him, but he's a great guy. And so Lincoln and I, we traveled to Cuba where we did music with a band. We went to Costa Rica with a soccer team, and he was a good friend. And finally, after I knew Lincoln for quite a few months, he said, Palmer, he said, I get pulled over in Wheaton by the police about once a week. I said, you're kidding me. I said, they never pull me over. He says, yes, because you're white. He says, but I'm not. He said, so they pull me over about once a week, and I have to explain, I'm a grad student here. I live here. This is where my home is right now. And so after several months of this, Lincoln went down to the police station, and he said, I want to see the chief of police. And I said, Lincoln, you're lucky with your cutoff t-shirt and your mohawk. They didn't just taser you when you walked in. And Lincoln found the chief, and he sat down with him, and he said, Chief, he said, your police officers are pulling me over almost every week because of the color of my skin. And so the chief profusely apologizes. And then Lincoln says, I want to do something. I want to hold a diversity seminar for your officers. And the chief said, okay, I'll set it up. So he made every officer on the whole force come on a Saturday to listen to Lincoln talk about what it's like for a black man to drive through the Mayberry town of Wheaton. And things started to change. You see, justice is when you start to help a society or a community regain its moral equilibrium. Justice is to pursue justice as like Micah calls us to, as followers of God. If we really know God, then we pursue justice. To pursue justice means that I am fundamentally bothered by things in this world that are not right. I'm fundamentally bothered by oppression. To pursue justice means that I am for the poor, and I do all I can to help pull the poor out of their poverty trap. To be for justice means that I demand equality and the equal treatment of all people in a community or in a society, regardless of race or ethnicity or nationality or gender or immigration status or any other factor, that I demand that all people are treated with dignity and respect. When I first moved to Arizona, I've been there about 10 years. You guys in California, you call us zonies, and we take offense to that. And when I first moved there, I had heard about our sheriff and that he had chain gangs. But I thought this was just like urban legend. I thought that really doesn't happen, does it? But then I was driving through Chandler, we're a suburb of Phoenix, and I'm driving down this boulevard, and here's a chain gang. It looked like a scene out of the 1950s. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a group of women. They were all chained at the ankles. They're in black and white striped uniforms, and there's deputies holding shotguns. And I thought, that's crazy. And so I hung a U-turn and I came back and I started walking towards the deputy, and he lowered his gun. I said, hey, I just want to ask you something. And I came up to him and I said, look, would you give a message to your sheriff? Would you tell your sheriff in Chandler we don't want his chain gangs? Because his chain gangs are shaming and dehumanizing these women, and it's not right. So would you give him that message? And he says, sure, I'll be glad to. I couldn't believe he said that. Well, about 2 or 3 months later, sure enough, this time it was right by our church. There's a chain gang, like 200 yards down the street. And so I got out of my car and I walked over to, and I said to the deputy, I said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave now. We don't want to shame these women in Chandler. And he said, well, who are you? I said, I'm a pastor. Yeah, so that meant something. And he turned to him and he said, load up in the vans, we're leaving. And I said, okay, great. And then I told some people what happened. They said, Palmer, that was terrible of you, because these women were excited to get out of their tent city and get out in the open and do some work, and you just robbed them of that. So then I felt horrible, like I had done the wrong thing. And so it wasn't long after that, we have a barista in our coffee shop on my campus. His name's Lawrence, and he came in my office. He's out of breath. He said, Palmer, there's another chain gang down the street. I said, grab a notepad. And I grabbed a pad. I said, get a pen, Lawrence. And we grabbed he said, why do we need a notepad and a pen? I said, we're taking orders. And so we drove down there, and I walked up, and we've got a pad and a pen, and the deputy's going, hey, are you reporters? And I go, no, I'm not a reporter. He said, what do you want? He said, I just want to take the girls' orders, or the young ladies' orders. He said, order for what? For coffee. I said, Lawrence is a barista, and he's going to make them whatever drink they want. And he's going to make them, a caramel macchiato latte, double decaf, espresso, whatever that is. He'll make it. He's great. And I said to him, I said, I just want them to know that somebody cares about them, that they are valuable to God. He says, hang on, let me call headquarters. So he calls headquarters and he hangs up. He says, no, they said maybe the pastor will put a shank in the drink. I said, I'm not going to put a knife in the drinks. And so he said, you can't. So he said, but you can talk to him. And so I just said to these young ladies, I said, I want you to know that what is happening here to shame you, I'm sorry. And I said, I want you to know more than that God loves you, and you are prized and treasured in the eyes of God. And you have value and dignity and worth. And I'm sorry that you're being shamed today. And you see, I hope that you know that around you every day, there are injustices that are happening, and you are called to stop it. In our worship, like I said, God keeps calling us to be a voice for justice. Henry Joseph this morning spoke from Exodus chapter 3, and he talked about Moses, and he talked about Moses dropping down in front of God. Before Moses fell on his face, what does God say? God says, Moses, take off your shoes. Okay? And think about this with me. The Hebrew word for being barefoot is yahef. Yahef means to be barefoot. But the Hebrew word for yahef also means dispossessed. So Moses takes off his shoes, and he's yahef. And he drops down on his face to worship the great I am. And what does the great I am tell him to do? He says, now, with your shoes off, go and free the Yahef, free the ones who have been dispossessed of their land and of their dignity and dispossessed of their freedom. So do you see how in worship, when Moses takes off his shoes, he finds solidarity with the oppressed, and he becomes one with them. And so that's why I use this phrase over and over. God said, take off your shoes and walk the holy ground of a broken world. I think the truth is, let's think about this together. Most of us, as I'll put myself in this category, as evangelical Christians, we don't think much about the biblical connection between justice and worship. But I want to try to convince you this morning that the Bible over and over makes a connection between worship and social justice. We are good in our churches, and I've been a pastor for a long time. We are good at singing songs and celebrating. We're good at teaching very cerebral messages. But in our worship, there's not much about justice. For the most part, our worship is absent of any language that talks about justice. In November, I called a friend of mine in St. Louis. He lives in one of the suburbs there. And I called him because for several nights in a row, I had seen people walking in protest in a neighborhood, now the name of is Ferguson. And they're carrying signs. A lot of them are carrying signs that say Black Lives Matter. I called my friend. I said, hey, so have you been down there to walk with the people who are feeling like their lives don't matter? Have you been down there? He says, no, I haven't even thought about going down there. And I said, well, are the pastors from your church and the leaders from your church, are they down there? Because I've been to the church he goes to. It's a red brick church with big white pillars and a white steeple on top and fancy cars out in front on Sundays. And he says, no, they haven't gone down there either. So think about this with me. Just blocks away in one community, people are carrying signs that say, my life doesn't matter. I feel like I don't have justice. And then just blocks away on a Sunday morning, you have people singing songs to God and reading the Bible and saying nothing about justice. You see, unfortunately, Isaiah, Amos, Micah, and Jesus say that kind of worship that's absent of justice is not just incomplete, it's kind of messed up. So what is your responsibility as a follower of God, as one who says, I believe in the great I am? What's your responsibility? I have several thoughts. The first one that I have is see and acknowledge injustice. And seeing and acknowledging, seeing and admitting that there's a problem is the first step. So if you have your Bibles and you want to turn to Luke, you can, or just listen. I'm just going to read 2 verses. Jesus picks up where Isaiah left off on this issue. His first message that he ever gave was in Nazareth in the temple. He opens up the scroll and he starts to read about his calling for justice and to the poor. And we read this, but then he tells a story. This is Luke chapter 10. He tells a story, you know it well. We have a man who's beat down on the side of the road. And then we read this. A priest happened to go along the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place, he saw him. And he passed by on the other side. So first, Jesus gives the example of the professional follower of God, the priest. That's the pastor. That's the ones in full-time ministry. That's the missionaries. They pass on the other side and do nothing. And then you've got the Levite who's grown up in the synagogue, followed God his whole life. That's like the Christians. A lot of us, it's like the person who never misses a Wednesday night Bible study or Sunday night. They lead a small group on Thursday, and they park cars on Sunday. That's that guy. And they walk on the other side. And Jesus' point in this story is that the dispassion and the apathy, it really frustrates God. And our spirituality, our worship is incomplete if it's absent of justice. And so, like I said, the issue is dispassion and apathy. There was an extensive study done in the late 60s, the most famous study done on bystander apathy or bystander non-involvement. You'd had this case in New York where a woman was beat to death and stabbed over a 20-minute period. 38 people witnessed or listened to her being attacked. and no one intervened. So these two Princeton psychologists, they led this study, Bib Latane and John Darley. And their findings were this extensive study on bystander non-involvement. Why would people not stop the killing of a woman? And do you know what their overwhelming number one finding was? People did not act because they believed it was somebody else's job to do that. People did not get involved because they were convinced someone else would solve the problem. And I share that because sometimes that kind of thinking, it creeps into our churches and it creeps into our Christian lives. And I want to say that when something is not right in this world, that it's your responsibility to stop it. So I said seeing and acknowledging is the first step. I didn't feel like the people at the church I was leading in Arizona were seeing and acknowledging the problem of extreme poverty enough. I didn't feel like they actually believed that 1.3 billion people live on less than $1 a day. I didn't think they actually thought that millions and millions of people go barefoot every day. So I stood up on a Sunday, and like I said in the video, I told them, we're going to have a barefoot Sunday. And I told them on barefoot Sunday, I want you to wear your best and your favorite shoes, your Maddens, to church, and then I want you to leave them here and go home barefoot and spend the rest of the day barefoot so you can empathize with how 1.3 billion people live every day. Take off your shoes was my message and walk the holy ground of a broken world. Well, I got home that night and I have 4 sons, and at dinner all 4 of them said, Dad, that's the worst idea ever. They said, you've had a lot of bad ideas, but this is the worst one. And they told me this, they all agree. They said, no one's coming to church on barefoot Sunday. I get to my staff meeting and someone says, Palmer, I believe it's illegal to drive barefoot in Arizona. And so I said, I don't care about that. And so with all that encouraging talk, we kept planning Barefoot Sunday. And the morning of Barefoot Sunday, my wife looks at her iPhone and she says, oh no, Palmer, it's going to be 107 degrees. It's September, who knew? And 107 degrees. And I said, sweet, people's feet will sizzle on the asphalt and they'll remember what it's like to go barefoot. I got to church, and the good news is my sons were wrong. You know, all 3 of our services we had a record attendance that Sunday. People left more than 2,000 pairs of shoes on one Sunday piled on the stage. And then, yes, we sent them to Africa, and I put college students on the back of motorbikes to give them away in Liberian villages. This is right after the Civil War. And then, but like I said, I told people to spend the rest of the day barefoot. Whatever you do, I want you to do it barefoot to see what it feels like. Well, sure enough, I have one of my good friends, DJ. He texted me, he said, thanks, Palmer. My family just got kicked out of a restaurant. It's shaming, isn't it? And I said, dude, what restaurant? He tells me the restaurant, and I don't want to tell you because then maybe you won't eat there, and that's not my point. But I texted back like, what are you doing at Denny's? You know, oh yeah. Because you would think of all the restaurants that would let you eat barefoot, it would be Denny's. You know, that's where you'd be welcome. And go to Payway. I eat there every year, barefoot. When I see you seated here this morning, I want you to know that you are the hope of the future church, the next church. There have been a lot of people that are not sure what to call your generation. Some call you Generation Digital Natives. Some call you Generation Next, but that doesn't make any sense because every generation is next. Some call you Generation 13, but I have a name for your generation. I have a name for your generation because this value was absent in my generation. But I've coined the phrase and called your generation, Generation Justice. Because as I travel the country speaking on Christian college campuses, I see more than anything else, your generation wants justice. And I love it. It's biblical and it's godly. I was on, one of the reasons I say this, I was on the Point Loma campus, and when I'm on your college campuses, on the hallways, usually in the cafeteria lobby, there's flyers for things going on. And this girl named Christian had put up a flyer. The name of her ministry was Beacon of Light. And her flyer was really simple. It said, meet in the Nice dorm kitchen at 5 o'clock on Wednesday. We're making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And then we're passing them out in downtown San Diego. Do you see, Christian is not waiting for someone else to feed the hungry of San Diego. Christian does not think that the hungry of San Diego are someone else's problem. Christian wants justice. She wants to pull the poor out of their poverty trap. There's another young girl, she's 23 years old. Her name is Jennifer Priest, and Jennifer is a reporter in Victoria, Texas. And Jennifer said that she stalked me on Facebook until I finally answered. And when I answered, it took me a while because she had this audacious request. She said, Palmer, I want you to help me hold a Barefoot Sunday for the whole city of Victoria. And I thought, finally I got her on the phone. I said, I don't know if that's going to work. She says, no, Palmer, I can do it. You don't understand. I know a lot of reporters. And so she made me promise to come speak on her Barefoot Sunday. And when I showed up, Jennifer Priest had 20 churches that went barefoot that day. She had 5 schools, 2 colleges, a synagogue, and a mosque. All of them went barefoot. It was crazy. And then she turned her newspaper delivery truck. She said, Palmer, we turned them into shoe pickup trucks. And they went around the city picking up thousands and thousands of shoes. You see, I love that your generation is bothered by what is not right in this world, because you get God's passion for justice and to free the oppressed, but not everyone who sits in church gets it. Do you know that? And that hurts. I had someone in my own church, and they used to be a leader there. They're not there anymore, but they stopped me one Sunday and they said, Palmer, you talk too much about social justice. I want to ask you to not use those words here anymore. Well, the problem is I'm a bit of a rebel, and so all that made me do is I got my Bible out, and I found every verse in the Bible that talked about justice. And the next Sunday, I just spent the whole morning reading verses on justice. People get angry when you do that. I brought some of my favorite. I couldn't bring all of them, but here's some of my favorite here. Next slide. There we go. Job, I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. I made the widow's heart sing. How good is that? Psalms, there's a bunch in Psalms. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. Proverbs, evil people do not understand justice. Ouch, that hurts. Isaiah, we already read from here, loose the chains of injustice. That's how your worship should happen. Micah 6:8, what does God require of you? To act justly and to love mercy. James 1:27, pure and true religion in the sight of God is to love and care for orphans and widows in their distress. You can't deny it. From Genesis to Revelation, justice is the raging heartbeat of the Bible. When I hear Christians say things like, I'm not so interested in social justice, it makes me wonder if they even read their Bibles. And I might seem a little worked up about this. It's because I am. And I hear this kind of talk over and over, and I just want you, this generation, to start sharing God's truth about this and his call in our worship. So the next thing that I want to challenge you to is to be a voice for justice. Let's go to the next slide. And I think one of the things that you have the ability to do is to speak up for the oppressed. In Proverbs 38, Verse 8, we read this, defend those who cannot help themselves. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. I have a friend by the name of Scott Erickson, and he's an artist. He paints when I speak sometimes. He's traveled to Liberia with me. His father was from Cameroon, and or was a missionary in Cameroon, and Scott paints at the Grove, and Scott says this about his art. I have a couple of pictures of his art. Scott says that my art, when I paint, is to be a voice for all the women and children in Africa who have been silenced in their suffering. I have another friend by the name of David Zock, and David is the lead singer of Remedy Drive, and last year David and I were in Thailand together, and one of the things I challenge students to do is to become modern day abolitionists, and David is becoming a modern day abolitionist. And so we're in Thailand to do what we can to stop the sex trade, and we're sitting over lunch having Chiang Mai noodles, and David starts telling us why he left his label. Remedy Drive is no longer with his label. And he said, Palmer, he said, I would write songs. And then the guys at my label, the people at the label would say, David, you keep writing about boy soldiers and sex trafficking and wars. They said, David, you're stressing your listener out, David. You can't do that. We want something positive and encouraging. That's what they told it. And so David said, I left the label. And so his first song he wrote is, I'm Not a Commodity. And he writes it for every child, every young girl, every woman who's being sold for sex. I turned on my iPhone when he was sharing the lyrics with us. Can we run that? I'm a soul inside a body. I'm not a commodity. Untie me. I've got to be let go. So David's music is now a voice for people who are sold for sex. And I want to remind you this morning, and I don't need to, that you have a voice. It used to be you needed a major news outlet to publish a story, or you needed a great-selling, best-selling author to write a book. But now through social media, you have a voice. You have a voice on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, Pinterest. Some of you, I don't know much, guys, not you, hopefully, but some of you others here know Pinterest. But you have the ability to not just reach hundreds, not just thousands. You can reach millions. You have a voice. Finally, the last thing I want to say this morning is that God calls us to be people who stop injustice. And my last challenge is act to stop injustice. So let's pick up Jesus' story and in Luke chapter 10, and we read next verse 33, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw the man on the side of the road, he had compassion, and then he went to him and he bandaged his wounds. So do you get this? Do you get what true religion is about? That the man actually stops and bandages the wounds. You see, my challenge to you is to get that you must act. That our faith requires that we actually do something when things are not right in this world. I had a moment just a little bit like what Jesus talked about a few years ago in Kenya. It was early on a morning. I was trying to catch a flight to Liberia to meet my team. I'd been in Malawi, and my taxi's doing maybe 55 on this 4-lane road to the Nairobi airport, when all of a sudden there's a matatu in front of us. And a matatu is a passenger van. They'll put 17, 20 people, stuff them in a matatu. Well, this matatu's in front of us when all of a sudden another van changes lanes and it hits the rear quarter panel of the matatu. It fishtails, it flips on its side, and then it goes upside down and every roof in the thing explodes. And now, if I'm honest, my first thought was, Palmer, if you stop, you'll miss your flight. Palmer, somebody else, professionals, there'll be ambulances coming soon. In that same nanosecond, my mind flashed back to Monrovia when I was 17 years old, and I said, God, I promise I'll live differently. And so I yelled at my driver. I'm quite certain he was to stop, and he hits the brakes. Quite certain he was a Christian too. We had been listening to praise songs in Swahili. I knew the tunes, didn't know what they were saying. And so he hits the brakes and he jumps out with me, and we start easing people through the broken glass one at a time. And I'm thinking it's gonna be sheer carnage, and then other people come around to help, and pretty soon we've got all like 15, 18 people out, and it's just a few cuts and bruises. And I was feeling good about everything. I was saying, like, see, good, Palmer. Good thing you stopped. Bravo. And then all of a sudden, my driver yells at me, they're killing the other driver, he screams. And I turned, and there's a gang of, let's say, 10, 12 young men with rocks stoning this guy to death. In East Africa, they call it mob justice. If you've been to Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, it happens. And so the mob is killing the man who caused the accident. And I've lived in Malawi, so I knew exactly what was happening. And so without thinking, I sprinted at a gang of men, and I dropped down over his head, and I thought, you know what, at least they're going to have to hit me first. And then I started screaming at them, stop, stop. And they're yelling back, get out of the way, we're killing him. And my driver, fortunately, is over yelling at them in Swahili, stop it, drop the rocks. And finally, one by one, they started to drop them. And I pick up the guy's head. And I sat with him. I said, dude, we got to get out of here. They want to kill you. And I'm not saying that. What I'm not saying is Palmer Chinchen is a hero. I'm not. I'm simply saying that those kinds of things happen around you all the time. And God has put you on this earth to stop the oppression, to end the injustice. And my point is, sometimes you have to act. My whole life, I've grown up in the church. My whole life, I've heard people say, preach the good news, right? We all know it, preach the gospel. I can't remember very much people saying, live the good news, do the good news. And I want to tell you this morning that sometimes we make the good news just something cerebral, some kind of intellectual exchange with God, something that is private and on the inside in our heart and in our head. And I want to say the good news, as Jesus embodied it, means that we actually do something to end and to change the places of hell on earth. My first book I wrote 4 years ago was titled True Religion, Taking Pieces of Heaven to Places of Hell on Earth. And the subtitle is Pieces of Heaven and Places of Hell on Earth, because I feel like in this life, God gives us glimpses of heaven. I really believe that. I think rainbows and beaches and sunsets are a bit of heaven. I think chubby little babies are a bit of heaven. I think dinner with friends and great music is a bit of heaven. I think Krispy Kreme donuts are a bit of heaven, all right? So we get a taste of heaven, right? But then, let's be honest, there's also places that are like hell on earth. And I've had people say to me, Palmer, your language is too harsh. It's not that bad, is it? And I would say, no, it is, because I've been there. I've been to Haiti, and I know that in Haiti, when mothers run out of flour, they make cookies for their children out of mud. They say at least it takes away the hunger pangs. And I want to just say, if there's a place in this world where mothers are making cookies out of mud, it's a place of hell on earth. And if in Thailand, 6-year-old girls are being sold for sex, that's a place of hell on earth. And we better do something to stop it. I lived in Malawi. If in Malawi, in the dry season, parents are trading a toddler for 2 bags of maize, this happens. That's a place of hell on earth. In Sudan, if women are being stoned to death for adultery, that's a place of hell on earth. And I say all that to say is that God put you here to end it. God put you here to stop it, not somebody else. Sometimes we think it's somebody else will do it, and I want to say it's you. The problem is not all people in church get that the good news of Jesus Christ is also tangible. It's something that we actually live out. I had a man stop me after one of our Barefoot Sundays, and he said, Palmer, just so you know, the people in Africa won't need your shoes in heaven. And it just kind of broke my heart because he didn't get it. And what he doesn't know is that I have a friend in Liberia. His name is Eleazar. He's a graduate of African Bible College. He's a pastor. And he wrote me in November. And this was his email. He said, Palmer, please bring more shoes. He had helped me pass out 10,000, 12,000 pairs. And he said, please bring more shoes. He wrote this. He said, women in my church have contracted Ebola, going to the outhouse because they're going to the outhouse barefoot, the village outhouse, and the children are going to the village outhouse barefoot. So his cry was, please bring more shoes. So I wish that I could tell this man, the people in Africa may not need our shoes in heaven, but they sure do need our shoes in places that are like hell on earth. And God calls us to make that connection and to live that way. I'll end with this. In my opinion, if you're not following Jesus Christ into the homes of the broken, you're following something, but I don't know if you're following the Jesus of the Bible. There's this great prayer that Bono prayed at a national prayer breakfast. Let me read it to you. He says this. He says, the one thing we can all agree on is that God is with the vulnerable and the poor. God is in the slums and the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. God is in the silence of a mother who has infected her child with a virus that will end both their lives. God is in the cries heard under the rubble of war. God is in the debris of wasted opportunity and lives. And God is with us if we are with them. I want you to let that sink in. God is with us if we are with them. And so my challenge to you, my question to you is, will you go to where God already is? I've written a manifesto, and I'll end with this. Do we have a slide for that? I don't have it anywhere on me, but I've written a manifesto for, not it, looks like that, there we go. And for your generation, for the future church, for the evangelical church in America, it's a manifesto, I feel, of everything that we're not doing yet. And I'll just end by reading this. And if you would join this tribe, I invite you to go to barefoottribe.com and just give me your email address. We're going to, we're in Haiti right now, at 54 people there. We're going to Malawi in June. We're going to Cuba in August. We're going to Thailand in November. We're going to Liberia in February. So come with me. We will stop injustice. We will embrace people of every race, nationality, and background. We will promote sustainability and social entrepreneurs. We will end extreme poverty. We will become modern-day abolitionists. We will stop the spread of pandemics like AIDS and malaria and Ebola. We will live simply. We will create more art and make the world beautiful. We will spread the kingdom of heaven in places of hell on earth, and we will love like Christ always. Thank you for having me. I love what's happening here. Keep doing what you're doing, Biola. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.